to our final primary assembly video of this term. It's nearly Easter. It's nearly the Easter holidays. Well, I'm excited. I don't know if you are. I've got my cup of tea. I've got my satsuma and a couple of cookies, which I'm going to eat later because I'm going to get messy. I always am, particularly with fruit. Well, boys and girls, staff, this is our final video of the spring term. Can you believe it? Well, it's been a blast, hasn't it? It's been great fun telling you these stories. Well, together with Sue and Andy and Linz and Lucy, we've been working together. Now, we live across Chester and this area, and we've been sharing these stories together, telling them, writing them, planning them together, obviously virtually, because we've not been able to record them together. And we hope you've enjoyed them. And this is the last one of the term. We'll be back next term, don't you worry. We're going to keep going. But in the meantime, this is the last one. And today's assembly is all about friendship. It's all about friendship. And Jesus was really into friendship. You know, he had some really close friends. They were called the disciples. And the disciples, that's Peter and James and John and Matthew and the rest of the crew, they loved hanging out with Jesus. And Jesus loved hanging out with them. They spent some great times together. Barbecues on the beach, fishing, storms on the lake, miracles, feeding lots of people, telling stories, crowds everywhere they went. They had a blast. They had just an amazing life together. And it's still going on because I've got another story to tell you, to remind you from the Bible. But before we do that, let's reflect for ourselves. Friendship. Friendship is really important to you and me, isn't it? We all love hanging out with our mates. And I'm just the same as you. I'm really looking forward to, over the Easter holidays and next term, being allowed, yes, allowed, to see my mates. We'll be able to see our friends. Yes, in the gardens, in the parks and stuff. We're not able to meet in homes just yet. That's okay. But just actually being in the same space as our friends. It's going to be great. It really is. And I'm sure, like me, you're looking forward to just hanging out with your mates, doing some more cool stuff with your mates again. So, let's go back to Peter. Peter's now reflecting on his time with Jesus. He had such an amazing time. He loved spending time with Jesus. And then sadly, he saw his best mate Jesus arrested and then sadly killed by the Romans. And he must have been so sad. And then he knows he let Jesus down. He denied even knowing Jesus and being Jesus' friend to the other people around him. And he was so sad. And then Jesus came back to life. Well, he said he would. And incredibly, he did. And loads of people saw Jesus walking about. And they had a barbecue together. Incredibly. And then Jesus sets them this challenge to go and share his good news. Wow. It's an incredible life that Peter had. And we're going to hear him tell some of that in today's story. And I'll chat to you later.
It certainly has been an amazing week. I've never known anything like it. There was the sadness of Jesus being arrested, let down by Judas, one of our own friends. Then he was put on trial and then sadly he was put to death, and we thought that was it. And then a few days later, there he was alive again. You can imagine how excited we were. Jesus was alive again. Our friend was here. It was brilliant. Although a little bit of me on the inside was nervous. Because you see, just before he'd been killed, when he was on trial inside the priest's house, I was outside in the courtyard and 3 people came to me and said, "You're his friend, aren't you?" And because I was scared they might get me too, I'd said 3 times, no. And that's exactly what Jesus had said would happen. And I'd been like, nah, that won't happen. But sure enough, it did. And the reason a little bit of me was still a little nervous about meeting Jesus again was we'd not had a chance to chat that through. Although I'd seen him since he'd come back to life, we hadn't had any one-to-one time. We hadn't seen him as much as maybe we did normally. So me and the guys did what we did best. We're fishermen, let's go out fishing. And there was one night that we got, well, nothing. Not even a single tiny little fish. And as we started sailing towards the shore, we could see there was someone on the beach by a fire. And he shouted, "Have you caught anything yet?" And we're like, "No." And he said, "Well, why don't you throw your nets over the other side of the boat?" Now, normally I wouldn't take advice from a stranger. I know how to fish. But there was something stirring inside my head, something that sounded slightly familiar. And so I thought, okay, we will. So we grabbed our nets, threw them over the other side, and then it started straight away. The nets were full of fish. We couldn't get them all aboard. The others were struggling, and that's when it suddenly hit me. This had happened before. This was familiar, and it was Jesus on the shore, because this is exactly what happened the first time we met him. So whilst the others grabbed all the fish, I was so keen to see Jesus. I leapt out the boat and ran to see him.
You see, Peter must have been really worried as he walked up the beach towards Jesus and all the other disciples. There's a barbecue going on, there's fish cooking. Must have been amazing. The smell, that fresh fish being barbecued. Wow, what a gathering. And as Peter walked up the beach towards Jesus, he must have thought, I've blown it. How on earth can Jesus ever forgive me? How will he even want to speak to me? Peter must have had his head down as he walked up. And then Jesus turns to him and says, "Peter, do you love me?" How many times did Jesus say that? And Peter kept saying, "Well, yeah, you know, Jesus. You know I love you." Can you remember in the story? How many times did Jesus ask Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. Just like the number of times that Peter had denied Jesus. 3 times Jesus said to him, "Do you love me?" And Peter realised at that moment that Jesus was actually saying, "I forgive you. I forgive you. Peter, do you still love me?" And Jesus was saying, "Peter, it's okay. I know you blew it. I know you fell out with me. I know that you wouldn't admit to being my friend. It's okay. It's okay."
When Peter got there, Jesus was sitting by a fire, roasting fish.
Take a seat. You're just in time for breakfast.
Peter was happy, very happy. And then Jesus turned and asked him a question.
Peter, do you love me?
Of course. You know I love you.
Then feed my lambs.
Peter was puzzled now, just a little puzzled.
Feed my lambs? What does Jesus mean? I suppose he trusts me. That's it. And he wants me to take care of his friends and followers.
But then Jesus turned to Peter again.
Peter, do you really love me?
Peter was even more puzzled now, very puzzled in fact.
Yes, Lord. You know that I love you.
Good. Then take care of my sheep.
Peter picked up another piece of bread. That's settled then, he thought. And then Jesus turned to him a 3rd time.
Peter, do you love me?
And now Peter was hurt, very hurt. He'd answered once. He'd answered twice. Did Jesus not hear him? Did Jesus not believe him? Why did Jesus have to ask him a 3rd time? And then Peter remembered. Another fire, another place, and another set of questions.
Hey, you!
Called one of the servants, and she pointed right at Peter.
Yeah, you! Aren't you one of Jesus' friends? I'm sure I've seen you with him.
Suddenly, Peter was frightened, very frightened, and almost without thinking, he shook his head.
No, you've confused me with someone else.
Peter was ashamed, very ashamed. So he looked Jesus right in the eye.
Lord, you know everything. You know I love you.
I know you're sorry, and I forgive you. Feed my sheep.
Peter was happy now, very happy. Jesus had forgiven him and given him an important new job. Peter wouldn't go fishing again for a long while.
You see, Peter must have been really worried as he walked up the beach to meet Jesus. he would probably think, oh, I hope that Jesus doesn't look at me. I hope he doesn't ask me directly anything. I hope I can just eat some fish and maybe I can get away with this barbecue without being noticed too much. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, hey Peter, do you love me? And Peter must have thought, huh? Well, yeah, you know I do. Of course, Jesus. And then Peter is asked again by Jesus. How many times does Jesus ask Peter if Peter loves him? How many times? Can you remember in the story with the puppets? It was, in fact, 3 times. Just like the number of times that Peter had denied even ever knowing Jesus after Jesus had been killed. 3 times. You see, Jesus was saying to Peter, do you love me? And Peter was like, well, yeah, of course I do. You know that, Jesus. And Jesus was saying, do you love me? And Peter's like, yes, Jesus, I love you. And Peter couldn't believe, well, why would you keep asking me this? And then he realised 3 times. 3 times Jesus asked me. It's just like the 3 times I denied him. Jesus was saying, do you love me? Because I still love you. It's not ever changed for me, Peter. I still love you. But do you love me? Because he wanted Peter to know that he still had a role for him. He still had a task for him to do. The challenge was still on. Go and love my people. Feed my sheep. The sheep were his people, God's people. That's you and I. That's all of us. That's the world. That's a lot of people. And Jesus was saying to Peter, just carry on. I love you. Get on with the task I've given you. And he says the same to us at Easter today. As you're watching this video, he says the same to you and me. Do you love me? Do you love me? John, do you love me? That's what Jesus says. And I need to decide whether I do or not. Do we love Jesus? Do we love God? Because he definitely, most certainly, without question, loves us. Well, happy Easter. I hope you have a great Easter time with your friends and your family. Enjoy your break. Enjoy this Easter. And I look forward to seeing you in the next term. See you soon. Bye for now.